my name is Shruti Majithia. I work as an API developer evangelist here at Best Buy. So I'm not going to talk about Best Buy APIs today. So if you catch me saying product or SKU, time me out. Okay? So my background has been in development, and I've been working on APIs for the past 4 years, I think, 4 or 5 years. And I've written some pretty bad APIs. So if you've been a consumer of those APIs that I wrote 4 years ago, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you had to use those APIs. So forgive me, developers, for I have sinned. Shall we go through some API confessions, bad API confessions, good API confessions? I'll start with mine. So I've written things like a get method with a / get accounts. Who does that? And then I've written a get method with update accounts. So if you've done that, don't do that in the future. It's bad. And I've done that. And so anybody has an API confession? I know happy hour is like 2 hours away, but come on, seriously. Who wants to go first? Then I'll, go ahead.
Most of the APIs I've written use post for both post and put.
That's a good one. What's your name?
Donovan.
Donovan, thanks. Anyone else?
Oh, about 14 years ago, when I really got going with it, I wrote an API for a freight system in Perl, and everything was identified by pointer variable as the commands and everything is in one file.
Wow, that's a good one too. Who else wants to go? Come on, don't tell me you've never written bad software. Come on, we all do it and we know it, right? We go back 5 years.
Limiting it to just APIs.
No, you can, let's just start doing any confessions, as long as it's software and we don't get carried away. Do you have one? Go ahead.
Shoddy documentation.
That's always a good one, right? Because we write like these fabulous, awesome APIs, but we forget to do documentation, and we expect that everybody has the context to it. So, yep. Anyone else? Go ahead.
For test coverage.
Mm-hmm. And then developers coming in telling you like, hey, this put request doesn't work. Doesn't put anything, right? Yeah. Anybody else? What?
I said 14 years ago, what was a put request?
Exactly. Jeremy, do you want to go on API confessions? Sorry to put you in the spot. We're just doing bad API confessions. Jeremy has used one of the APIs that I wrote for him.
Yes.
So.
It is working great.
Awesome.
Confessions.
So that's a good confession.
There you go.
Right. Yep. All right. Let's get started. So, fun fact. Did you know that the Brits have been awesome at APIs since the 1600s? And you know why? Because they have King George I and King George II and then King George III. So they've been awesome at pagination. They thought like in the 1600s what they were going to do. All right, so how can we do pagination? Okay, before I go into it, I'm just going to talk about simple REST standards that we all probably know about. We've probably Googled. But somehow in developing APIs, we go back to our software design principles from 10 years ago, which may be valid in software, writing software, but maybe a little different when it comes to writing APIs for the external world. So I'm just going to go through stuff like, pagination and versioning and response formats and just some basic stuff like that. So let's start with pagination. You obviously don't want your users to read an essay, right? Like if they're calling a request, you don't want to send them 100 XML elements and each element has each node has about 100 children, right? You want to send them limited information. So you do pagination. And how can you do pagination? There are a couple ways. You could either do it through link headers. Now I know it kind of gets into the hate OAS world, and people are a little touchy about it, but it really works sometimes. So you send back a link header with a relationship, and then you either go alternate next last, and then you could have an option of also providing the number of records. So that's how you do it. The good part is that the user doesn't have to, or the developer who's using your API doesn't have to go through the work of forming their own URL and then working with it. You just do it for them. And the bad is that it's not very intuitive, because I've seen most APIs and most famous APIs and well-written APIs doing them in just metadata, response metadata. So going to response metadata. So this is another method of doing pagination. So you provide a limit and offset, or you could provide, you could call it whatever, as long as it's well documented, right? And then, so some good APIs like LinkedIn, Twitter, Etsy are doing it, and Facebook is also doing it, but I don't know if I want to call it good API. I just want to call it an API. So it's very popular and it's most commonly used, but I think that sometimes it just interferes with the response, like a bunch of metadata in the response, and the developer has to go through the metadata, try to find out, form their own URL for the next request. So versioning. This has been my favorite part. So I've been reading a lot on versioning, and I used to work at Apogee, so I've worked on a number of APIs there, and it was always interesting to see how people do versioning. A lot of people do versioning in the URL, which is the most popular way of doing it, which is great. But just imagine this: if you remodel your kitchen, are you going to change your address? No, right? People still know how to get to your place. They still know that you live the street that you live on, unless you move. But you don't change your address every time you make any changes to your house. So the same way, why does the API URL why does it have to change every time you do something different? Why can't we put it in except headers, So that's one of my challenges with URLs. And I've actually always done it in URLs, but I would love to try it in accept headers someday. So the next way to do it is, as I said, accept headers. It's called content negotiation. So in your accept header, you provide the version number. And the good part about this is, it's all REST compliant and stuff like that. Roy Fielding's vision. And again, we're not purists here, right? We're pragmatists. So whatever works, whatever floats your boat or your API. Let's talk a little bit about response formats. And I'm not going to get into the debate of XML versus JSON. XML works great in some cases. Christian there is smiling at me because we've been through this discussion so many times, this and other discussions. So XML is great in some cases, enterprise systems talking to other enterprise systems. Yep, XML, great match. And JSON is great for, as we all know, in mobile applications, and just consuming it is so easy. So we won't get into that argument. But how can you specify a response format? You can do it through, again, content negotiation with accept headers. So you just put in application/XML, application/JSON. I try to steer away from text XML and text. Text XML. And then you can also do it through query parameters, like you just have your format equal to XML. I'm personally not a fan of that, but if you got to do it sometimes, you can. But I try to stick to accept headers if I control the design. What is JSON-P? JSON-P is JSON with padding. So in some cases, your JavaScript app on a domain may not be able to talk to your applications on other domains because of security concerns. So in that case, you use JSON-P callbacks. So in JSON-P callbacks, you have a callback parameter. which you specify as part of your query as a query parameter. And the server sees it, and when it sees it, it wraps your JSON response in a callback and sends it back to the client. And that can be consumed by the client with the script tag. I would love to hear more if anybody has a lot of experience with JSON, how to consume JSONP, because I've always been a provider, so. And has anybody implemented or used CORS, cross-origin resource sharing? So that's another way to get through the whole XML, HTTP request thing. So in that, you have your options request, and you send your origin server through HTTP headers. The server sees your origin and sees the options request and sends an HTTP response header back saying that, OK, I'm going to allow you, and you can access the data that I have. And the next request that goes to the server is your post or put, and that happens seamlessly. The client doesn't have to do it again. So that happens, and then the server sees that and then sends the response back. So that's how CORS works. And CORS is a little more sophisticated, and it's great. So next, let's talk about rate limiting. So you were probably told as a child, right, that sky's the limit, or sky's not the limit, or whatever your parents believed in. But trust me, when it comes to APIs, there is a limit, OK? And don't go crazy on like looping your calls, API calls, in for loops and stuff like that, and try to use caching and stuff, because people are going to stop you. Like if you're going like 6 requests per second or more, or sometimes 4, you're going to be in problems. Like they're going to say, all right, you're done here. Come back after 30 seconds or 30 minutes, whatever. But when companies tell you to come back in 30 minutes, sometimes they don't do a really good job, because they'll just stop your access, like developer inactive. What does that mean? Is my key bad? Or what do you mean? So a good practice is to send rate limit headers. So be nice to your developers, send these headers, and if you're in a mood of being extra nice and extra generous, send a 429 too many requests, because that way they'll know, like, OK, this is going on. Because I hit my rate limit and throttle, they're just asking me to come back in like 30 minutes or 15 minutes. Twitter does a really good job of it. And if you've ever tried to do any Twitter projects, like find, I know someone who did find 6 degrees of separation on Twitter, like, I don't know, 5 years ago. And they came across this problem, and Twitter does a really good job of saying how many requests you have per minute. So you don't have to go to their documentation. You can just read the headers, and you come to know. OK? And let's go through status codes. So how many of you have had to see really bad status codes, HTTP status codes, and you have no idea of what's going on? Like, you get a 400, but yep, exactly. Yep, I know. I know. Status codes frustrate me the most. So if everything goes OK, your GET request was served, send a 200 back, and please, if you don't have any data to show, or the developer sent you a bad request or a bad query parameter, and the object doesn't exist, don't send a 200 OK. It's not OK. And a 201 created is for most of the post requests. So if everything goes well, send them a 201 created. And a 204 no content for delete requests. So don't send a 200 back for a delete request, because they just deleted some resource out of your system, right? The 400 requests, these are actually my favorite, because people often get they often send back a 400 for a 404 not found. So if it's a malformed request, the URI is malformed, or the path is wrong, and instead of instead of, I'm just trying to find an example, and I don't want to say product or SKU. Instead of instead of slash account, they say accounts, or instead of accounts, they say account. It's a bad request. So send them a 400 because, and if they send a bad account number or something, send them a 404 not found. Like, you don't have that. Resource doesn't exist. I've seen those two being interchanged, and they shouldn't be. And then 401 unauthorized and 403 forbidden. There have been so many times when I try to access an API and I get a 403 forbidden. And it's like, okay, maybe my key was bad, so let me write them an email or a support ticket asking them, what's wrong with this? I just created it. They come back with, oh yeah, but you didn't accept our terms and conditions. Okay, so then why wouldn't you send me a 401? Why would you send me a 403? So if it's invalid credentials, send a 401. If it's valid credentials and the user doesn't have access to the resource that they're requesting, send them a 403 forbidden. And recently I saw I don't have a slide on 500s, but 500s are usually, you know, your server acting up, and that's when you send a 500. So if you're sending a service unavailable, and there are times, right, when you have to pull down a service. Your servers are getting hit pretty bad, and you want to just calm things down and, you know, take them down for maintenance sometimes. And if you're returning a service unavailable error, try to send a header back saying retry after. And retry, we spoke about retry after a few slides ago. Try to send them that so at least they know that it's, you know, ETA is about, say, 60 minutes, so I'll get my data back in 60 minutes. That's a good practice. So some nice to haves. 415 unsupported media type. I've run into this so many times when people try to ask for, you know, CSV. Well, your documentation doesn't say you don't support CSV. It only says you support XML and JSON, but it doesn't say explicitly that you don't support CSV. So try to send a 415 unsupported media type if they're asking for something that you don't provide. We spoke about 429, too many requests. Next one is 405, method not allowed. Again, I've seen so many APIs where, you know, you only have get requests, but you don't have post and put and any other methods. And it just gives you a cryptic error, and it gives you a 200 OK. How is that OK? You're not supporting put and post. So just try to send a 405, method not allowed, so the developer knows. And of course, your documentation supports that, right? Because documentation is always awesome. Let's talk about some good practices. Again, I said the thing that I used to do with my first few APIs, get accounts, okay? And then what do you do when you want to update that account? You do an update account. Naturally, you should do, try to stick to get, post, put, delete, and some instances patch. And then your resource address always should be the same, that is /accounts, and not /get accounts, right? And try to always use nouns versus verbs, because nouns are good. And they just tell a person what's going on, they tell a developer. So that's actually a must-have. Let's go through some nice-to-haves. Pretty print and Gzip compression. Again, as I said, nobody wants to read JSON essays on their browser. So try to do a pretty print, and some very modern frameworks these days just give it to you. You don't have to do anything extra for it. Just maybe put a config in your property in your config file, and you're done. Grails does this really well. Spring does this really well too. So try to use your framework and leverage that. And really, if you do a pretty print on your JSON, it's not that much of an overload. Maybe like, I don't know, 2 KB. And then if it's a very large response, and you shouldn't be sending large responses, very large responses, but if you have to, then do a Gzip compression on your server. So that takes that away. And the next one is snake case versus camel case. And this is just a preference, right? I mean, I've been working on Java applications, and I've been using camel case all these years. But the recent trend has been snake case too. So there was a research done, and they said snake case is 20% easier to read. It depends. If you come from, yes, go ahead.
Out of curiosity, is there a context around where snake case versus camel case is easier to read, or was it a very generic study?
It was, I think it was generic, but I would think that in query parameters as well as your JSON responses, and I know the JSON uses camel case again, but when you consume your responses, it's like, it's more easier to read when it's in your responses as well as your query params. So, yeah. So I think Ruby does snake case, and what other? Does Python do snake case too, or camel case too, or snake case too? Python does, right? Yep. So this is, again, it's just a personal preference, and it's not a biggie. I mean, people are still going to consume your API. It's just how readable you want it to be. Let's talk about filtering, sorting, searching, and limiting fields returned. People often write really good APIs, but forget that developers sometimes may want to see just thumbnail images and names, and that's it in the response. They don't want to see something else. They don't want to see your domain object exposed in its entirety. Like, nobody cares about it, really. If I'm developing a mobile app, I want the minimum viable information on that screen, right? So try to limit fields, try to do a good job on filtering and searching and sorting. And then resource associations and complexity. I remember writing an API with 4 levels deep. So it was, I think it was person, account, went back to some form of person, and then went back to some type of account. And it was just nasty. Like, why would anybody want to use that? So an example is the PayPal API. So it's version 1/payment/authorization/authorization ID/void. Okay, so what do if I was looking at it, and if I come from the object-oriented world, I would read it as, so version 1 API, and then your main resource is payments, and then authorization is a type of payment, and authorization ID is the ID of the authorization object, and then void is again some kind of resource within authorization, which is not the case, right? What they're trying to do is a type of payment which has been authorized, and the authorization ID is 123, and the type of payment is void, right? So you can represent that as in query parameters, because it's more readable. I don't have to go through the whole URI and try to figure out what's going on here, right? Especially for external APIs, it's a good practice. Internal APIs, if you're the only one using it, who cares? Do whatever you want to. Well, don't, please, because you can't maintain it in the future. The next one is my favorite, dev portal and writing good documentation. So as I said before, you may write really good APIs, but try to document them well, because other people are going to use it. And you may not be on that product or project after the next 2 years, but other people have to use it, right? So have a good dev portal, provide good code samples, and make it easy for other people to use. That's the lesson. Some sources that I used are Apogee ebooks. The Apogee has some great ebooks that I always go back to. And then API is a strategy guide written by a bunch of people. Daniel Jacobson is one of the authors. And he leads the API program at Netflix. That's a really good book. And then one of the earlier books is the API, REST API Design Handbook, which I often go back to. And then there's this blog, vineysani.com. And if you don't have time to read the 3 books, this is a Cliff Notes sort of place. So I go there often too. And then recently we discovered that, I know this is going to sound funny, but the whitehouse.gov has APIs, and they actually pull a lot of standards from, Apogee and other good places. So that is a good reference too. And that's it. Any questions, comments? Don't be mean to me, because, I may go into labor. No, I'm kidding. I won't. No, I'm kidding. Totally kidding. Any questions? All right, before questions, I'll make a shameless plug. Check out the Twin Cities Geekettes. And we want to get everybody, men and women, more men and women into tech. And we have an event coming up on April 24th, Introduction to JavaScript for New Developers. So if you're a server-side programmer like me and you want to get into JavaScript, send us an email. I think we're sold out, but we can always do something. We can work it out. So send us an email. Any questions on APIs, API design? Yes?
I have a random question about that. So what is your opinion, when you design an API and you have inputs required A, B, and C, what is your opinion on throwing an error when you send too many inputs? Do you think that it should just ignore them or throw an error or what?
Are you talking about, like, say, query parameters, extra query parameters, or if I'm getting what I want, so for example, if I'm doing format equal to, and this is a response format, equal to XML or JSON, and if they're sending that to me, I'll take it. But if they're, if the API requires 3 parameters and they're sending all 3 of those, and they're sending a 4th one, which I don't care about, I would probably ignore it. And I would just take into consideration the 3. But if they're messing up in those 3 parameters, then I would send error responses back. Yeah.
So, on your question on on your suggestion on making it sending only the responses that the client needs. I have 2 clients. One client needs the complete address, and the other client probably needs zip code.
Mm-hmm.
So should I be writing 2 different APIs, or create one and let the other client set it up and get over to it?
You could, what you could do is you could have an API which returns both, but then give clients an option to just get the attributes that they need. So in your query parameters, you could have a filter attribute or filter query parameter, and it could be a comma-separated list of whatever they need. So if one needs, response attributes A and B, they could just ask for that. If someone needs the whole 9 yards, they could not say they could not even include that query parameter, in which case you send everything back.
Some kind of filtering.
Filtering, yes.
Very novice question, but if you are a developer in the field, how often is it that you do your own APIs?
A lot, actually. So, now the whole world is going towards, different kind of apps, right? So in order to, big companies have a lot of legacy systems with legacy data, right? So how do you get those things into the, and I won't name one of the clients that I work for, but they had this huge order system, and they wanted to take that to their stores on apps, flexible fulfillment. So how could they do that? So, they just write an API proxy, which sits in the middle. It takes the data from your really old 20-year-old systems, massages that data, provides that as JSON and XML, which could be consumed by front-end systems. So as a developer, I see this trend more and more. Like it's like having a website now. Like 10 years ago, if you didn't have a website, it was like, you don't have a website, what? And now it's like, what? You don't have an API. So, yeah. Yes.
Is there any case where you see SOAP better than REST?
Oh. Yeah. If you're doing something like an order management system to, I don't know, some other legacy enterprise system, it's great. Those cases are, those scenarios are great where you have to have a contract between two systems, use your SOAP web services. But if you don't want to have a contract and, it's like fast consumption, fast delivery, then, REST APIs or HTTP APIs are the way to go.
So if you're starting from scratch, definitely REST.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, it depends on who's going to consume it, right?
Yeah.
So.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, like I feel as the world goes modern, we're like, oh, those systems were crazy. Like, why would you do so? But there are some legit cases where you may want to do that. Yeah. More questions? No? Yes?
We have a design principle that's we're questioning, thinking about nouns versus verbs. Thinking about like a user resource, we'll have get, post, put to create one, get information about one. But we tend to put delete into a separate resource. We have if you want to delete a user, you don't call delete user resource. We have an explicit delete user resource that you post to with the expectation that since deleting a user destroys data, we want to make sure that someone's doing that intentionally. And I'm curious what your reaction to that idea is.
I would still go now, from what I know, since the past 4 years, 5 years of being into APIs, I would still prefer to do a delete unless, you have a security thing where anybody with a key or, if you're not adding any additional security measures, you're not doing, your authorization headers or whatever for your delete and you're just using the key. In that case, I would maybe go the other route where it's like not really well, you don't expose your delete request to the whole world and you expect that, oh, what if they do a delete on this resource with their key? I don't want to allow that. So maybe in that case, but if you're adding a layer of security in your put, post, and delete, and it's not very apparent to, the external world, I would still do the delete request with the same / resource. All right. If you have any more questions, I'll be here for some more time, and you could always email me, or I'm not too good at Twitter, so you can still tweet me, but I may, I don't know, block myself or do something like that while tweeting back. So, yeah. Thank you all.